Ever since entering the video game market back in 1984, the development giant we know as Capcom had produced a variety of games in many different genres: beat-em-ups, fighting games, platformers, and even puzzlers. There was still a genre that they had yet to touch by the early 90s. That is until they finally released their first ever role-playing game in 1993 in Japan and 1994 in North America. This is Breath of Fire on the Super Nintendo. But before we take a deeper dive, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Techeries. They're your one-stop place for all things tech and gaming news. Plus, they host live shows every Sunday on YouTube and Twitch. Follow the link on screen and in the description to check out their page, and be sure to drop a follow so you don't miss out. Although this was the company's first RPG, they weren't starting from complete scratch. They didn't need to bring in any outside help, as many talented employees within the company were already adept fans of the genre, enough to have dissected and understand what's needed to be done to make an RPG flow as such. Where they did need assistance, though, was localizing the game to the North American market. Capcom USA did have experience with translating and marketing the type of games that they had already been producing, which were not nearly as text-heavy as an RPG tends to be. So, they enlisted the help of another RPG giant, Squaresoft. Their North American offices were far more equipped to translate all the text in a timely and cost-effective manner, as well as know how to appeal the genre to the North American audience without changing the game. As such, this version of the game credits Squaresoft as the publisher. They would even go on to evoke the name of Final Fantasy in their marketing, just to turn heads to Breath of Fire. With all the ambition to expand their repertoire, how does Capcom's first RPG stack up? Unlike many RPGs, the intro was plain and simple. You had the publisher and developer logos fade on, then off on a black screen. You had the publisher and developer logos and copyright info fade on and off the screen, followed by the protagonist walking up from the bottom of the screen, raising his sword, and having a lightning bolt strike down. And then we see the title fade in. All of this happening on a black background. Seems Capcom was looking to get right into the meat of the game. Starting a new game, you immediately get to rename the main character, which will also be the title of your save file. The default name is Ryu, but not that Ryu. Hadouken! After name input, you're immediately taken to the options menu to pre-configure message speed, sound type for your speakers, and key configuration. Breath of Fire's entire game only needs 3 buttons to play through, A to confirm and B to cancel. But what about the menu? Well, something I like that Capcom did was rather than just leaving the unused buttons dead, they allowed you to assign menu shortcuts to the Y, X, L, or R buttons. If you only wanted one button to open the main menu, that would be fine, but you could also use other buttons to go deeper quicker into the menu, and you'd be able to navigate through all options no matter where you ended up in the menu. When finally getting into the plot, Ryu is woken up to his village being attacked and on fire. His sister, Sarah, being a very powerful mage, manages to save the villagers but is captured by the enemy. This sets off Ryu's journey to go rescue Sarah, which will have him encounter a variety of anthropomorphic denizens and humans with extraordinary powers. Some of these folks will also join him on his quest as you encounter and aid them. There's Nina, the human princess of Windaria, who will mainly operate as a healer for your party, and later on she'll be the key to using this game's overworld fast travel mechanic. Bo, a wolf man who uses a bow and arrow in combat for range damage and out on the overworld to hunt quadrupeds for items. Plus, he can allow you to travel through previously untraversable forest tiles. Karn, a human from the ancient order of thieves with a confusing ability to merge party members together to make strong combos of a character. He can also pick locks and disarm traps in dungeons and towns. Gobi, a fishman who can allow you to swim in water in the overworld. Ox, a large oxman with massive melee damage output and able to smash down walls. Mogu, a mole man who can dig just about anywhere to try and find treasure. And finally, Bleu, an immortal sorceress with a snake-like lower body similar to a naga, who commands some of the most powerful magic in the game. It's a pretty unique group of playable characters with a lot of varying skills. The game plays like a typical RPG, where you have towns, dungeons, and an overworld to navigate through. As you traverse the world and dungeons, you'll come across random encounters in a bid to survive and reap rewards of experience points, money, and sometimes free items. And reaching towns typically sets into motion subplots of those regions and likely including future party members. All that walking around, by the way, has to be done at a walking pace only though, as there's no run button to be found. As you battle and level up, the menu will allow you to view and adjust your party's equipment, items, magic, status, composition, as well as readjust options if you wish. You can only have 4 party members in your combat group, but remaining members will still be along for the ride for plot moments. Outside of the menu, some characters also have skills they can use on the overworld and in dungeons, some of which are necessary to progress the story, and of course used to obtain secrets. Battles are presented in an isometric angle, and you can see your party members actually dash up to the enemy to lay on their melee attacks. Combat is turn-based, where you have to enter your character's commands first, and then the round plays out, taking character speeds into consideration. The input menus start out image-based rather than text, but when selecting items and magic, you still have to read text. For each party member, you have to first determine if you wish to attack or run. You'll also be given the option to check party status, move characters to the front or back rows on the fly, swap in reserve party members, and you can even activate auto battle, which can be turned off by pressing B anytime. When attacking, you can choose a standard physical attack, choose a magic attack, use an item, or elect to defend, thus reducing incoming damage. So, despite the simplified combat menus, it's my opinion that the combat of Breath of Fire is pretty slow and sluggish. Compared to other RPGs at the time, and even today, you had an extra button press to make on every character for every action. This may not sound like a lot until you remember that RPGs are all about menu navigation, and it stacks up a lot. Having the auto battle option was a great addition to make basic combat run through faster, but when you go into boss fights, you couldn't just rely on the feature's attack-only strategy. Like most RPGs, boss fights are tougher, and you have to use every attack, spell, and item to maximum effect to taste victory. Except here in Breath of Fire, that extra button press comes into play. And stack on top of that, boss fights in this game are needlessly long and tedious. Boss HP gets taken down on average 1% from your strongest attacker, maybe 3% from a magic user, but also they hit you hard. So hard you're going to be taking every second turn to cure everyone before you can get back to laying on damage. And God help you if the boss has an attack that hits all members. And even beyond that, once you finally drain a boss of their HP, you would think the fight is won, but no. There's a second phase where the boss starts flashing multicolors, has a remaining and unknown pool of HP left to damage, and gets new attacks and stat boosts. This second phase just felt like a big kick in the nuts after taking so long to slowly whittle away the enemy's HP. It wouldn't be so bad if maybe the health of bosses were reduced by maybe half, or just skip this silly second phase altogether. Either way, this combination of using both is what you get in this game. Now, if that wasn't annoying enough, remember I mentioned there's no run button? Yeah, that drags things along. Plus, while the overarching story is okay, it's the smaller plots that just drag and have a lot of reviewers calling the story bland. Even though I've only put in about 8 hours into this game so far, I tend to agree. The gameplay of Breath of Fire gets a 5 out of 10. With the title screen being as basic as it is, it was clear that Capcom just wanted to get to the meat of the game pronto. Mind you, that title design though is pretty great. With RPGs being menu heavy, I would have expected some more love to go into the design. Sure, Capcom elected to use images rather than text in some instances, but it wasn't really enough to distract me from the plain and chunky text. Now, the character models though, that's where this game excels. The main character sprites aren't squashed like Final Fantasy had been doing at the time, so there was room for lots of appealing detail. Even in the opening story cinematic, you gotta look at a bigger than the average sprite, so it seems Capcom wasn't going to limit themselves in sprite sizes. The combat sprites all felt tall and anime-inspired. They had choppy movement, but many appealing poses, all you really needed for RPGs of '93. Enemy sprites were surprisingly detailed, and charming even. However, you'll realize at some point that they had to put in all the detail because there's going to be a lot of sprite reuse and recolors. Now that's nothing new for RPGs, but the base number of models is way under the norm, and becomes one of Breath of Fire's negative points by reviewers. Backgrounds make good use of colors for whatever mood they're trying to convey. Dank dungeons keep the palettes dark, while lush forests are a bright green and bustling towns are filled with all sorts of colors. There come some points where the minute details of each tile feel meticulously placed. It's almost described as crunchy, like they were left in the fryer a bit too long, but that's not bad. The combination of the background colors and character palettes make for a visual that feels between Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy. This went a long way in making Breath of Fire stand out while still feeling familiar and welcoming. The graphics of Breath of Fire gets a 7 out of 10. So, my exposure to the music of Breath of Fire is actually really limited for reasons that I'll get into later. But to try and balance that out, I actually took some time to listen to the whole game's soundtrack. What really stands out to me is how a lot of tracks put the harpsichord in the forefront, accompanied by RPG staples like trumpets, flutes, and violins. It felt like a lot of the soundtrack was composed in the classical or romantic era of music, so of course, one's mind would place the game's world into a similar feeling environment. Safe towns sounded cozy, while dangerous towns and dungeons gave a gravitas of danger. The overworld theme felt epic and encouraging, which is a good thing because it feels like you're going to be spending a lot of time on it. It's been said that reviewers tend to praise the game's music, but I gotta be honest, I'm not sure why. A lot of the event, town, and dungeon songs all sound really generic and long-winded to me. I gave these songs a few listens and re-listens, but I'm just not able to pick up on the appeal of the compositions. It's not bad, but at best I'd say they're serviceable. As for the battle music, it certainly starts off well, but soon gets tedious along with the gameplay. Thankfully, the final third of it does pick back up in its energy, but it's a track I'm not really ever looking forward to hearing multiple times on the journey. The boss music also tries to up the stakes, but it feels like it would have served better as an event song rather than trying to be a heart-pounding epic. Now I know it sounds like I'm being pretty harsh on the music here, but here's some food for thought. It's my opinion that Breath of Fire's music was ahead of its time. The compositions sound like real instruments would have made things sound much better, but the transitioning to the SNES chiptunes didn't go over so well, and that's why they just sound muddled, generic, and unnuanced. Let's also give a little credit to the fact that it was Capcom's first crack at an RPG, so it wasn't exactly their forte. Adding to the audible disconnection of the game are the sound effects. So many of them don't sound like they belong in the setting. In fact, I would wager that they took sound effects from their other properties like Mega Man or Street Fighter, adjusted them slightly, then slapped them in. The cursor movement, for example, sounds too new age and jingly. Menu confirm and cancel sounds make me feel like I'm on a game show. Even something as simple as a sword slash is just too chunky of a sound, and it really took me out of the game audibly. The music and sound of Breath of Fire gets a 4 out of 10. Breath of Fire is one of those games and franchises that I actually never crossed paths with growing up. Sure, it would feature heavily in game magazines, and the North American box art was a fixture all around the gaming stores and rental shops, but not once did I see or play it. Somewhat a curse of having too many options and no actual purchasing power. And even when I got older, got money, and got into RPGs, I still didn't even fathom trying the game out. I wasn't trying to avoid it, it just never happened. Now, fast forward, and I mean really forward, to 2024. I had a portable retro gaming machine that I was reliving old classics on, often while tucked into bed, just waiting to get tired enough to go to sleep. One day, I just randomly decided that I could finally jump in and see what made Breath of Fire so beloved. I knew that it being a 30-plus-year-old game, that it wasn't going to wow me, and there would be some jank. Playing it was by no means painful, or else I wouldn't have kept playing it. But I realized that the slog of the game pace wasn't just it being old. Yes, there came a point where I just dropped playing it because of that though. So really, the most nostalgia I can say I have for this game really just comes from reading about it in gaming magazines and seeing the full-page advertisements with some imposing artwork. The nostalgia hit gets a 2 out of 10. As it turns out, it looks like this game just wasn't for me. But I'm not saying it's a bad game, I just didn't absorb it at a time that I probably should have. Breath of Fire is still held in high regard by reviewers and players alike. To this day, it places well on top 100 SNES game lists. Back in the day, it was said that the game's success was considerable in Japan, but only moderate in North America. It did, however, experience a rare second win when the sequel came out, and it was still iconic enough of a game that Capcom figured it was viable to make a remaster on the Game Boy Advance in 2001. But it got updated to have a menu system more like Breath of Fire 2, along with some other quality of life upgrades, like running, for instance. The original SNES versions can also be found on the 3DS and Switch Virtual Consoles. Now, there's something to be said about a game that managed to spawn 5 more sequels over 23 years. But when looking back at the original, you can see a lot of clues that it was Capcom's first RPG. Unfortunately sluggish and time-consuming, but with appealing graphics and fun characters. The music needed better instruments to become something more, and it was very apparent to Capcom themselves that the menu system needed an overhaul. Dare I say, this game could really benefit from a full remake with improvements all around, and it seems to me like there'd be a massive appetite for it. But the original Breath of Fire on the Super Nintendo was a nice first try, but no cigar.